Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here with the Hutchings Museum in Lehi, Utah. Today we're going to talk about dodos. Now, dodos are an amazing species that is extinct and only very recently extinct. There's a lot of misinformation and mischaracterizations of this species. We're all pretty familiar with the image of the dodo, and really the Alice in Wonderland was the first to really get the image and the icon of the dodo out there. Now a lot of times it's called a dodo bird, which is kind of stupid. Saying dodo bird is like calling a cow mammal. Oh, there's a cow mammal, there's a deer mammal, there's a dodo bird. Well, we know it's a bird, so it's just a dodo. Part of the reason why this species is so famous is because of the word dodo. It's fun to say, it sounds funny, and it actually is funny. It's basically Old Dutch and it means basically fat bottom because they have a pretty big caboose. But they didn't always have a big caboose, it just depends on the scenario, and I'm gonna get into that in a bit. So what is a dodo? Where are they from? Because of the movie series, The Ice Age, a lot of times people think that dodos are an Ice Age species. They actually kind of are, because the Ice Age is the time right before us. So every species alive today was here during the Ice Age. That's how recent the Ice Age was. Dodos did live where they lived during the Ice Age, but they're a very recent extinction. By the 1700s, they were extinct, and it's a very, very recent extinction. A lot of people don't realize that. Dodos only lived in one place on the planet, and that was on an island called Mauritius, an island country off the coast of Madagascar. And on that island they were the king, they were the largest animal there. They actually are a type of flightless pigeon. They didn't start off flightless. They came to the island and colonized it, and once there, they got bigger because there were no natural predators. Pigeons don't build elaborate nests anyways. If you look at most pigeon nests are just a few bits of grass here and there. There's not much to them. And so for them to just nest on the ground made the most sense. The bigger you are, the stronger your bones can be. One of the things that made dodos get big was they ate a lot of nuts and fruits that were very large. So large that swallowing it whole was difficult, and this favored them getting bigger over time. Now, the first people to encounter them said that they were stupid, that they were foolish, they were dumb, and that's why you get the idea, dumb as a dodo, dead as a dodo. But in truth, they were not stupid, they were fearless. They were the largest thing on the island, and with a beak like this, you can imagine just what that would have been like. And so when they encountered humans for the first time, they were not afraid, and people just killed them. But very quickly that they realized humans were a threat, and they tried to escape from humans, and even the last of them swam off to a tiny little sub-island off of Mauritius, and those were the last of them because they realized really quickly how dangerous humans were. But what kind of pigeon is this? And what did a dodo really look like? Well, we have DNA from dodos, and the dodos that we have left, the information we have left from their DNA is that their closest living relatives are the Samoan tooth-billed pigeon, which is very critically endangered. Also, the Nicobar pigeon, which is a brilliant, beautiful colored animal, and the Victoria crowned pigeon, which is the largest pigeon alive today. This is a pigeon with a glorious crown, a big old crest, and it's kind of larger than a chicken but smaller than a turkey, very big. So these are the closest living relatives. Now, if you ever go to a museum and you see a stuffed dodo, it's a fake. 100% of them are. Even the famous one in the British Museum, they are all fakes. There is no taxidermy dodo in existence. However, there used to be one. There was one in the British Museum, and over time it got so moth-eaten that, years after it had originally been donated to the museum, then the policy of the museum was, well, if a specimen gets in such poor condition or gets moth-eaten, then it could be a detriment because you could have moths or little parasites that break down the collagens in the specimen, and those might spread to other things. So the tradition and the policy of the museum was, if that is the case, you burn it. So the only dodo specimen in existence was set to be burned. But fortunately, there was a new curator at the museum, a young guy, and he realized, hey, this might be of value for the future. So he saved the head with the skin on and the skull inside, and the foot that had all the scales on. He saved these from the fire. Now, we know these were both saved. The foot itself has gotten lost over the years, and we don't know whatever happened to it, but it is somewhere else now, who knows where. But we do have the head, so we do have some feathers and skin and DNA from this dodo. We also have many skeletons that have been found from the island. And so that is how we've done DNA tests and how we know the dodos are in fact members of the pigeon family. But again, these are giant pigeons. Well, what do they really look like? The amount of first-hand witnesses we have to dodos is very limited. There's actually only about 14 original people who actually saw them and illustrated them, and about 15 people who wrote a first-hand account. Most of these first-hand accounts are just a couple of lines. You know, they were big and fat and easy to kill and good to eat kind of thing. Not much information. There's countless illustrations of them, but most of them are highly inaccurate. It was of the time for an artist. Remember, there was no digital media in this time period, and so artists were kind of like superstars in a sense, because you could add flair and pizzazz to any image, including to royalty. You know, you make you're going to paint a royal, you're going to paint them stronger and fancier and more decadent looking. You want to embellish. And that's what was done with nature, because there wasn't a lot of interest in nature. And so the way to get attention as an artist with nature was to make it into a story. A lot of times, a lot of animals were humanized, where you would have, a bear in the forest, like looking like a man, fighting and like boxing, things like that. So people added embellishments. They made things brighter, fancier, more decadent than they actually were in the wild. This is what happened with the dodo. If you've seen the image of a dodo, it probably looked really dumpy, super fat and very short, squat-legged and kind of goofy looking, and with a big old fancy floofy tail that looked like ostrich feathers and fancy floofy wing feathers. Too short to fly, of course, but very fancy. That's not what dodos looked like. We know from the original people who came to the island who actually illustrated them, which is just sailors and amateur artists drawing what these things look like. We have a good idea of what they look like. But also, I don't know why this doesn't get shared more often, but the absolute best illustration ever done, we actually have, thanks to the Emperor of India. We're lucky enough that a masterful artist named Ustad Mansoor in India documented a dodo perfectly. So let me tell you how this works. If you're a sailor, your job is to be good at running a ship. If you're a hunter, your job is to be good at hunting. These are the kind of things that were happening when people came to the island of Mauritius. However, a live dodo was taken from the island and was given to the Mughal Emperor of India. Now, he had a menagerie of weird, crazy wildlife from around the world that he kept. A lot of European travelers mentioned it and mentioned seeing the dodo in the collection. Well, the Mughal emperor had a royal artist. And this royal artist, you got to get things right. If you're getting paid by the emperor, your job is to get it right. If you get it wrong, you're going to lose your job and maybe worse, right? Well, he depicted the emperor's dodo in exquisite detail. That's what this dodo is based off of. And you'll notice both with this recreation as well as the dodo, the painting, that even though it's kind of, it's got a big backside, it's not as dumpy. It has longer legs, has a narrower face. Its tail is incredibly short. And the wings are there, but they're not big, floofy, frilly things. And it's not colorful, except for a little bit of blue just there under the chin. That's the most accurate dodo we have. Again, this is taken of a live dodo painted by a royal artist with formal training. And when we look at his other art is exquisite and always accurate of other known animals. So the most accurate dodo we have is that. And it tells us quite a lot about what a dodo should really look like. So let's talk more about these dodos themselves. The island of Mauritius is an isolated island off the coast of Madagascar. And anciently, whatever evolved into dodos made it to this island. Well, whatever that ancestor was, they also made it to the island next door, which is called Rodriguez Island. It's very similar, but it's a little more deserty, a little less tropical. And on that island, another animal evolved, very dodo-like, the same size as a dodo, called a Rodriguez solitaire. You've probably never heard of it for a number of reasons. First of all, the word dodo, it's easy to remember, it's funny, it's fun. But Rodriguez solitaire, what is this? It's a solitaire. What are you talking about? It's not a very good, catchy, memorable name. But also, most of the first-hand accounts are written in French. And so if that's the case, you're not going to, if you're in America, you're not learning that firsthand. You're not reading these French accounts of sailors who encountered these. So the Rodriguez solitaire was narrower, it was skinnier legged, and the males were much larger than the females. And interestingly, the males on their wrists developed these big old bony calcifications, and they were described as like a mini cannonball. And they would fight, they would spar and fight with each other. We don't have anything like that anywhere else in the pigeon world. We also don't have it ever described with dodos. So for whatever reason, they developed these calcifications. Rodriguez solitaires lived, 50 to 100 years longer than dodos, but also ultimately met the same fate. But the story of dodos is kind of sad. The island of Mauritius, where dodos lived, and the island of Rodriguez next door, where the Rodriguez solitaires lived, had no humans and had no land predators. And so because of that, dodos and solitaires grew huge. When they met humans for the first time, they weren't afraid of them, and humans easily killed them and ate them. That's not the only thing that made them go extinct. That was the initial thing. But particularly on the island of Mauritius, there was another flightless bird called a red rail. Now, rails are birds that live in marshes. There's many species of rails all over the world. And it has been noted by biologists that wherever rails go, if there's no predators on the island, they rapidly lose flight, rapidly. So there's a number of species of extinct rails and almost extinct rails that are flightless. And again, for whatever reason, normally it takes time to lose flight. Rails seem like they're just chomping at the bit, like, come on, just give me a reason to lose. Give me one land with no land predators. I want to lose my flightlessness. And the red rails were described as being tastier. Dodos were described as being more like a goose, kind of greasy. They were good to eat, but the red rails were much better to eat. And so the red rails were also killed to extinct, but nobody ever hears about those because they don't have a name like Dodo that's memorable. So there's a number of species that went extinct on the island. Now, who came to these islands? Well, the first people, and this isn't often mentioned, was actually Arabic sailors. Middle Eastern sailors were the first to discover, as far as we can tell, Mauritius, and the first to hunt dodos. And it would have been the ones who brought that one live dodo back to the Mughal Emperor of India. Then later on, you had the Dutch and the French. And what happened was, people hunted the dodos, but people also brought cats, dogs, pigs, and rats that came on the ship. These four animals wreaked havoc. Because remember, dodos originally had no land predators, and they didn't worry about nesting on the ground. But now you have dogs that are going to come and eat the eggs and the babies. You have cats that are going to do likewise and kill and eat young dodos. And then the rats would eat the eggs in mass. And rats, anywhere sailors have ever ended up, rats, they run across the ropes from the ship onto dry land, and they wreak havoc. And the pigs were the worst. The pigs caused huge problems, and they destroyed much of the landscape, just rooting around for things. And herds of wild pigs were documented to have caused all that problem. So even though humans did hunt dodos, by far the most catastrophic thing to ever enter the island of Mauritius was the pig that then went feral and became wild herds. So sadly, that is what killed off the dodo. So dodos, again, brilliant animals. If you look at the skull, the real interesting thing, for a pigeon, that's enormous. And if you look at the brain case, by size, this is as big or bigger for its body size than that of a chimpanzee. They had enormous brains, and they seem to have been quite smart. if you look at the first initial accounts. But again, they normally attribute to them being stupid because they weren't afraid of humans. That's actually sad. That's sad to think that we as humans think everything should be afraid of us, and if it's not afraid of us, it's stupid. Well, that's sad that you think another life form's first assumption of you should be fear rather than curiosity, which they were very curious. Now, one of the things that they eat is there is a type of fruit and seed that they eat that's enormous. And they would eat this fruit, swallow it whole, and then poop out the nut, and then it would germinate. And that particular tree is now highly endangered on the island because they don't have dodos going around populating them in this way. Now, if you're going to eat a seed that big, basically the size of a walnut, how do you break it down? They did have a strong beak, but they're pigeons. Pigeons, if you know pigeons, what do pigeons do? Pigeons have to eat grit. Pigeons do not crack open seeds. There's some birds that do, like finches, for example, will crack open seeds and eat the seed out from inside and get rid of the shell. Pigeons do not. Pigeons will just go eat seeds whole, and then pigeons eat grit or bits of gravel, and then in their stomach it will grind up and break down those seeds, and they can digest it. It's the same thing that dinosaurs did. When dinosaurs, we call that gastroliths. And many of our plant-eating dinosaurs we find, when we find their skeleton, we'll have a ball in the rib cage with a bunch of big old rocks that dinosaur swallowed to help break up that plant material they had. Well, dodos took that to the extreme, and dodos would swallow, they'd swallow rocks about the size of a walnut. And it was interesting, one of the live ones that was brought back to Europe, that was kind of the show. They're like, watch this thing will eat these big old giant rocks. And it would just, and just eat these big old huge rocks. It's kind of crazy. Now that gives us some insight into why some of the original illustrations of dodos look fat and dumpy, and some of them look very lean. There's a very specific reason why. Now, I have learned about this firsthand by working with birds of all kinds. Now, birds of prey, I've worked with birds of prey my whole life. I've trained birds of prey. Birds of prey are very lean. They're hunters. So there's a sternum, there's a keel bone right here that the flight muscle's attached to, and then there's a sternum, and after that, there's the viscera, the gut, where your stomach and your intestines are. And on a bird of prey, that's very tight, just as it would be on any other predator. You have to be tight and lean. So I grew up with that kind of a mindset towards all birds. And it wasn't until I raised hornbills, I raised African trumpeter hornbills. And what I found is they had a very weak digestive system. And when they would eat a bunch, they would eat some bits of gravel and they would eat a bunch of fruit, so much fruit that they needed their stomach to break it down. And what would happen is once the sternum went down back to the bottom there, after that, it would bulge out after they ate. So it's going to the end of their sternum and then bulging out. And then later on, once they had digested everything, that would retreat back to being under the size of the keel bone and the flight muscles. It's the same thing on dodos. If you look at a dodo skeleton is quite lean. But the same thing, they were eating these enormous seeds and nuts and fruits and swallowing them whole and then swallowing giant rocks to break them down inside, and all of that, once it got down past the rib cage, would sag. Pigeons do the same thing, but pigeons are so small that their feathers covered up. If you're a bird this size and you're swallowing those heavy of rocks, it's going to show. And that is why half of the dodos we see in original illustrations look dumpy and fat, and the other half look quite lean. But the important thing to remember is that all the dodos we see, all the illustrations you see that were not done by original people who actually saw them, are always over embellished. And they're always made to look dumpier than dodos really were. There's one that's kind of a halfway between exception. There is an illustration, a painting that was done by an artist, and this artist saw a real dead dodo. He had he illustrated a taxidermy specimen, but you can still see on this image that we'll show that this dodo, even though the head was a little off and the posture's not quite right, again, he's depicting a taxonomy specimen that did originally exist. But you can see the wings are small, the colors are very muted and dull, and the tail is tiny. And it gives you a better idea of what dodos really look like. The sad thing is we don't have dodos anymore. Now, there is a company right now called Colossal Bioscience. They are working to try to, as they say, de-extinct animals. They're trying to find recently extinct animals, such as the woolly mammoth, the thylacine in Tasmania, it's also called the Tasmanian tiger, and the dodo, and they're trying to see if, with the DNA we have, could we bring these animals back from extinction. The reason is not just to see, oh, could we just do it? Like, wow, this would be great, how amazing, like Jurassic Park. But these animals filled an ecological role that is now lost. I mentioned earlier how dodos would germinate certain plants on the island of Mauritius, and in their absence, those plants are going ungerminated. Well, this could be a good way to do it, is by trying to bring back these animals and restore these broken ecosystems that were broken up by human intervention. Don't know if it'll happen or not, but it will be interesting to see in the coming years what Colossal Bioscience is able to do. But I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about dodos. They're a fascinating species with a lot of misinformation. But if you would like to learn more about dodos, and if you would like to learn more about birds in general, come visit us at the Hutchings Museum in Lehi. Our address is 55 North Center Street, and we have an amazing collection of things to see. So if you haven't already, if you can hit subscribe to our channel, we very much appreciate it.